Check, check.
It's time for a Big Blue Kickoff Live
Nobody can ever tell you that you couldn't do it because you did.
on Giants.com
You know what I saw? New York Giant pride.
and the Giants mobile app.
17-14 is the final. One touchdown, we are world champions. Believe it, and it will happen.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's go out there like a bunch of crazy dogs, have some fun.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Tuesday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. So glad you could be with us for the next hour. We'll talk Giants football at 201-939-4513. He's Matt Citak. I'm Paul Dottino. And, you know, it's funny, folks. This is the first week of the Phase 3, which involves OTAs and the mandatory minicamp, which actually won't be coming up until second week of June, in terms of the minicamp, that is. But, you know, it's a little bit of a dry period. Tomorrow, we're going to have to move the show. For those of you who listen to the program live at 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time every weekday, tomorrow's program is going to move to 1:30 p.m. That's because of the Giants' OTA schedule. They've got their first media avail at their OTA sessions tomorrow morning. There's going to be a quick OTA practice. There's going to be Coach Dable. There's going to be media sessions with some of the players. So in order to bring you guys complete coverage of what happened tomorrow, what was said, what's going on here, we're going to move the show back an hour, and we will start at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. You on the show tomorrow?
Yes, John and I.
Okay, so you guys are on tomorrow. 1:30 p.m. to 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time tomorrow. So let's get that out of the way right away so you guys can kind of plan your lunch hours. I know a bunch of you like to hold off eating until the program starts. So 1:30 p.m. tomorrow for the live edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. And as always, if you don't catch the show live, it's available on the archive, on podcast platforms everywhere, giants.com/podcasts, and the Giants mobile app. Okay, we got the business out of the way. Now we talk about the question of the day. Now, NFL.com just posted an article within the last couple of days. We were off over the weekend, and we had the Memorial Day, and I hope everybody had a pleasant holiday. And don't forget to obviously remember those who were lost in the military. In terms of our question today, the NFL.com article wanted to know, in the NFC, each of the teams have a most underappreciated player. Who is it? Well, Matt and I are going to go over the NFC East for the purposes of this program. We don't need to go through all the teams in the NFC. They've also done an AFC article as well. We don't need to do those. But I think the NFC East is appropriate, since that's where the Giants play 6 of their games during the course of the year. Very, very important games. And so we thought that we would kind of go through this, and perhaps you guys have some thoughts. Maybe you agree, maybe you disagree, maybe you have something else you'd like to talk about. We're okay with that too. But that's our question of the day. The most underrated or underappreciated, I think that's the word they used, appreciated. Most underappreciated player on each of the teams in the NFC East. Now, just because I don't want you guys to listen to us talk about the Giants and then click off the program, we're going to go in alphabetical order. Okay.
Before we just get
Yes.
into this, just real quick, just gotta acknowledge it that I think you might have said this. OTAs did begin today.
Yes.
There was a practice this morning. It was the team's first day back after a 4-day weekend. They also had Friday and yesterday off for the holiday. And as a lot of you may know, it is also the Giants Foundation charity golf outing this
Yes.
afternoon. So It was a very, very abbreviated practice. Not a whole lot, happened. That's why we didn't, start the show by letting you know everything that happened in practice.
It was not even a practice. Remember, no contact.
There's no contact allowed at all during OTAs, but today especially, there's nothing that we could even report to you about what it was more of I think just like a transition day, get the whole team or everyone that's here, get them back, get them sort of ready to go. Tomorrow is when things will really pick up. There's a full 2-hour practice. As Paul mentioned, Coach Dable will speak to the media before, players will speak to the media after. Tomorrow there'll be a lot more going on. There really is just not a lot to report. I didn't want you guys to think that we just decided to, forget about day one of OTAs. There's just nothing we could tell you guys of interest.
For veteran listeners who already know what OTAs are, that's fine. But you're right. There are new folks who may not understand this. The OTAs, and it's good that you actually brought this up because that's known as an organized team activity. Okay? You're going to get a month of these, but then in that third week, you get to have your veteran and mandatory minicamp where everybody's supposed to be here. Otherwise, they can be fined. That's the only week of this month period before everybody goes on summer vacation where they will have full gear on and they'll actually run through plays with full gear.
Yes.
At this point, in all the other weeks of this phase 3 of these OTAs, they got shirts and shorts and helmets. The helmets look nice, okay? They look nice, but they don't serve a purpose because nobody can hit anybody.
Yeah, there's no contact allowed. As you just mentioned, this is the start of phase 3 of the off-season workout program, which is the final full phase. Mm-hmm. We've had phase 1 began the week of the draft, got through phase 1, through phase 2. Now it's phase 3. The team is all together. The rookies are with the veterans. So, most of the team is out on the practice field. Over the next 3 weeks, this week, next week, and the following week, there will be 10 OTA days, 10 days of practices, with today obviously being the first one. And each of those 3 weeks, there'll be 1 day of media. So Coach Dable will speak before the practice on that day. Players will speak after. For this week's schedule, the media day is tomorrow. And then I think the next 2 weeks, it'll be the next 2 Thursdays is when the media will be here. There'll be sort of a lot more for us to, talk about and report about what is going on. But throughout these next 3 weeks and even following the 3-week stretch is the minicamp that Paul was just talking about. There is still no contact whatsoever allowed throughout these next 4 weeks of practices. So, you'll hear from us. You'll hear from the beat reporters when they're here about, some one-on-one matchups between receivers and cornerbacks, tight ends,
but
safeties.
Relax. It's very preliminary.
Take everything you hear over the next few weeks, including from us, with a little bit of a grain of salt because there's zero contact allowed. There's really not much you can gain from the offensive lineman or defensive lineman at all during this stretch. You like to see the guys just out there and moving around, looking agile and quick, but especially those guys, until they can really start going at it with pads on, which is not until the start of training camp in about 2 months, there's not a whole lot to gain. You will be able to get a little bit more from, the receiver, tight end, and defensive back matchups.
Positions.
But again, you got to keep in mind that even those matchups, there's still no contact allowed. So it's not like the corners can, press the receiver at the line of scrimmage before they run out. So just take everything you hear over the next couple of weeks with a little bit of a grain of salt.
So we will actually be moving the show back on those media available days to 1:30 in each of those cases, but don't worry about that now. We will tell you about that as the days come closer. We will let you know. For this week, there's only one show that gets moved. That one's going to be tomorrow.
Yep.
Okay. Now, back to the question at hand. 201-939-4513 if you'd like to give us a call. So we'll go alphabetically, and the Dallas Cowboys, being that they're a D, they get to be first in this conversation. And the NFL.com article selects wide receiver Jalen Tolbert. Now, I can appreciate that because CeeDee Lamb gets all the ink, right? Their wide receiver room has the one true superstar, and then everybody else is kind of a second level also ran. At least that's the perception.
Well, they did just
So
trade
I
for
get it.
George Pickens, who
Well,
they
that's-
hope to elevate that number 2
I was
spot.
just getting there.
Sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. I was just getting there. They have since added George Pickens from the Steelers, who now is going to be part 2 of this sensational duo that the Cowboys hope to deploy this season. I looked at it and I said, no. For me, it's Jake Ferguson. Ferguson, in my opinion, is one of the top all-around, full-service tight ends in the National Football League. I loved him coming out of school. It does not surprise me that he has produced well and wrestled the starting job away in Dallas. He's a quality player who's got terrific hands, runs really good routes, can get yards after the catch. He blocks. He's not afraid to get his nose dirty and do the dirty work. Okay, so he's not Jason Witten. I get that. The standard in Dallas for tight ends, going back to Billy Joe Dupree and even Mike Ditka before that, is very, very high, okay? I totally understand that. And that's why I'm going to go Jake Ferguson as the most underappreciated Cowboy because, again, with a high standard for tight ends in that organization, he has not necessarily been an all-pro, all-NFL guy, and so I'm going to say he's the one for me.
Yeah, that is a good pick. He was very solid last year. Honestly, the last 2 years ago, he was even better than last year. Last year he missed a little bit of time. I forgot what injury he had, but
he was banged up.
Yeah, that is a good pick. Just in terms of Jalen Tolbert, that was actually my pick for the Cowboys breakout player last year. And obviously that did not come to fruition. He wasn't, awful, but certainly did not come close to breaking out. Maybe this year, now that he's the third receiver and potentially the fourth option in the passing game, because I would put Ferguson above him on the pecking order, maybe he has a little bit more of a breakout, but I agree with you. That's not the pick for most underappreciated player for me either. There were a couple of players I considered. Jake Ferguson was one. Since you went with him, I'm going to steer away from that.
No, you can.
There's another player who I do think is underappreciated, but he's not going to quite get this because he's not been his normal self the last couple of years, and that's Javonte Williams, the running back that they just signed for the Broncos.
Okay.
He had a serious injury 2 years ago, was coming back from it last year, still played the whole season, but did not look as spry and as quick as he did to start his career. I do think he's going to have a much better season this year than last year, but since he's had a couple of down seasons, I'm not going to go with him either. I'm going to go with Dante Fowler, who they just signed to a one-year deal this offseason. He was with, I want to say, Washington before this.
He's bounced around a bit and had some very good seasons and some very quiet seasons.
Yeah, so he was with Washington last year, but was with the Cowboys the 2 years before that. And the reason I think he's being a little bit underappreciated is his 2 years in Dallas, he had 10 total sacks between the two seasons. Last year with the Commanders,
double digits,
10.5 sacks.
Yep.
And this is a guy who has reached double-digit sacks in his career previously as well. He had one season with the Rams. He had 11.5. And now that he's going to be on the opposite end of the line from Micah Parsons, who will obviously be garnering the most attention from opposing offensive lines, will be getting double-teamed, probably more passing plays than not, Dante Fowler is going to just get himself a lot of one-on-one situations. And if he has a season even close to what he had last year with the Commanders, but now playing on the opposite end of Micah Parsons, he could easily be looking at another double-digit sack season.
And the rest of the league were not like that very much.
No, especially the Giants were not like that at all.
Yeah, he wound up, coming back from, as you said, 2 subpar seasons and did some really good things for Washington last year. Quite frankly, I thought he was one of the bright spots and surprising spots for the Commanders' defense.
I'm with you.
All right, so now we go to next up, and that would be N for the New York Giants. And the article suggests Jermaine Illuminor. And I understand that. He's not a guy who gets a lot of headlines, who gets a lot of attention, and yet is very workmanlike. Just goes out there every single week and does his job, and he's very reliable. But for me, I'm looking at a guy who I think has a little more pop and a little bit more value and a little bit more luster in terms of where he's usually talked about and rated. And I'm going to go with Darius Slayton. I think that Slayton this past offseason, and by virtue of the contract that he got, you'd have to say he was one of the more highly regarded wide receivers around the league in free agency because he got a pretty good deal to stay with the Giants.
Yep.
Most people don't look at him that way. Most people look at him like, oh, well, he'd be a number 3 on many of the good teams in the league. Or maybe he'd be a 4. I hear that a lot from people. I look at Darius Slayton and I say, look, he's got pretty good size. He's got really good speed. He's a pro's pro, despite the fact that the Giants' passing game has not exactly been prolific over the last several years. He still goes out there as Mr. Consistency and averages 15 yards a catch for his career. Now, I defy you to just go out into any supermarket shelf and pick a 15-yard per catch receiver at will off of that shelf. It does not happen every day. So I would say I'm going to go with Darius Slayton, although I do think there is a segment of Giants fans who do appreciate him. So for those of you, he would not be a good pick. But for those of you who do not necessarily appreciate him and kind of see him kind of buried underneath the rubble of the Giants' passing attack, I think he's a good pick.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And I know I briefly mentioned this to you right before we came on air, but ESPN put an article out, and they picked the most underrated player at each position across the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
And at the wide receiver position, they went with Darius Slayton as the most underappreciated wide receiver in the entire NFL. There was a word you used when talking about him, and I'm glad you chose that word, consistent. Because he has been the model of consistency since the Giants drafted him in the 5th round of the 2019 draft. Every year, year after year, he has proven to be, that downfield option, the guy that can stretch the top off the defense, take the top off the defense. He's just been consistent. Ever since, I think it was the rookie minicamp after he got drafted, it was a huge storyline that he had a lot of drops in that 2-day minicamp.
Mm-hmm.
Since then, drops have not really been an issue. Obviously, he's had a couple here and there, of course.
He's had some inconsistencies
He's
in terms of his hands, but his play overall has been very consistent.
His play has been very consistent. The drops, I don't think, have been a big issue.
Not
over
as
the last couple of
much
years.
as with other receivers.
Yeah. So I do like that pick. I'm going to go in a slightly different direction. I do think Jermaine Illuminor is underappreciated by many people around the league because, especially last year, whether it was starting at right tackle, where I know we've spoken a lot about the first 6 weeks of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Offensive line was healthy. Andrew Thomas was healthy. They had the same offensive line for every single snap over the first 6 weeks. Well, during those first 6 weeks, Jermaine Illuminor did not give up a sack. Did not give up a single sack. Obviously, Andrew Thomas got hurt in that Week 6 game, missed the rest of the season, and things started to crumble on the offensive line from that moment. But Jermaine Illuminor was very solid. Even after he got switched to play on the left side with not too much time to, he spent all offseason training first for guard, then for right tackle, and then halfway through the year he got thrown to the other side where he hadn't trained at all at left tackle.
It was a tough spot for him.
Yeah, and he was still very solid. So I can't, dismiss NFL.com for choosing him.
No,
because
it's a very
fair pick.
Yes.
I'm going to go with one that I know those watching, you and I, we certainly do not underappreciate him.
Your favorite player,
but,
right?
But the fact that he is not thought of as one of the best at his position across the NFL baffles me because when he's been on the field, he has been nothing short of dominant, and that is Andrew Thomas.
Okay, wow.
I know you and I both consider him to be one of the best tackles when he's healthy in the NFL.
Sure.
And I know a lot of you watching at home or wherever you're watching probably agree. Granted, he's had injury issues. He's missed some time, especially the last 2 years. He's missed a lot of time.
Mm-hmm.
But in the stretches of the last 2 years where he has been on the field, he looked like that 2022 Andrew Thomas, the one that was a second-team All-Pro.
Right.
2 years ago, he missed basically the entire first half of the season. Took him a little bit of time to get going once he came back. But the final month of the season, he was that dominant All-Pro version that we grew accustomed to in 2022. Last year, the first 6 weeks of the season, really the first 5 weeks, because he got hurt at some point during that week 6 game and didn't quite look himself for the rest of that game. But the first month plus of last year looked like the normal Andrew Thomas. And now, because he's had these 2 injury-riddled seasons in a row, it seems like he is just being criminally underrated by just about everyone across the media, across the. I'm sure teams are not, undervaluing him because they know what he can do when he's out there.
You threw me a curveball. I thought you were going to go with Greg Van Roten.
I do love Craig.
I know you do.
You know I love
He's
Craig
your guy.
Roden.
He is your guy.
I know. I almost went with him, but then I realized, I'm like, wait, I've literally, I look for articles every day to write about Giants now, just topics about the Giants, players being highlighted. No one ever talks about Andrew Thomas on any of these media outlets. And it annoys me because we know how good he is and how dominant he is when he's on the field. I think he just needs to have one of those seasons where he just is able to stay on the field, because we all know what he can do when he stays out there. Hopefully that will be this year, because as we've come to learn, when he's healthy and he's out there, the offensive line as a whole plays significantly better, which is no surprise because he's our best lineman.
So you're taking some of the philosophy also that I use with Slayton in terms of where the guy should be and where he's kind of talked about.
Yes.
Slayton should be valued much higher, and I think people
100%.
around the league value him higher inside the league more than people outside the league.
Yep.
And that perhaps is what you're talking about with Thomas.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just after the 2022 season, which obviously he was an all-pro, where the media was considering him one of the top tackles in the league. Just because he's had some injuries, which the injuries he's had, it shouldn't, alter the rest of his career. He, should be back healthy. We hope we should be back healthy at the very least for the start of training camp, if not sooner. So there's no reason to think that he can't return to his 2022 version.
All right, let's go to next up, the Philadelphia Eagles. By the way, dial us up at 201-939-4513. The Philadelphia Eagles, defensive tackle Moro Ojomo gets the pick from NFL.com. And I understand that they wanted to go with Milton Williams, who left because of free agency. And you guys know, coming out of the draft, I was a huge Milton Williams fan. So never underrated here, but it doesn't matter now. He's not on the Eagles anymore, so he's not eligible for this particular column. So they decided to go with Ojomo, talking about his efficiency in terms of his pass rush snaps and how well he did in those particular plays. I get that, but for me, I'm looking at Nakobe Dean and Zack Ball, 2 of their starting linebackers, who both got accolades this year, but because they hadn't done much in the previous 2 or 3 seasons in the NFL, I kind of think that maybe their impact on this particular Eagles team, with all of the superstars that they have up front, and with all of the superstars they have on offense, I kind of thought that they were both underappreciated. And you can pick either one of them. Because even though I believe, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Dean one of the comeback players of the year? And I think Bond made first-team AP All-Pro, did he not?
Bond was first-team All-Pro for sure. He was probably the best linebacker in football last year.
Yeah. Now,
him and Fred Warner.
If I said to 20 people out in the parking lot, if I went out there and talked to the construction workers who were doing the World Cup town setup for the club soccer that's coming here, and I grabbed 20 of those guys, and I said, give me the top 5 linebackers in the NFL, his name's not coming up.
No, probably not.
It's not.
It should, but it's not.
So, by definition, does Bond become that guy for this category? Because until this breakout season where he had 150-plus tackles, he was nobody.
Yeah, and honestly, I was talking to a friend who is a huge Eagles fan. I do have one of those. I'm sorry. But
I'm just surprised you let him live.
But I was talking to him about Zack Ball, I think it was during the playoffs, and he told me that Zack Ball was signed basically to be a special teams player. Mm-hmm. That the Eagles, when they first signed him, did not really have much thought or consideration on him starting at linebacker, let alone, getting a lot of snaps at that position. And it was Vic Fangio that once he had him in the building was like, wait a second, I think we might have something here. And sure enough, again, was one of the best, if not the best linebacker in football, and got a new contract this offseason where he's getting paid like one of the top players at his position, and it is deserved. But you're right that, before this season, not only would he be nowhere in the ballpark of the conversation for top linebackers, but he wouldn't even be considered a starting linebacker, really.
Well, I think if you went to 20 people before this past season, they would have had a hard time telling you if he was still in the league.
Yeah.
After 4 years in New Orleans and doing nothing.
100%.
So I think right now you'd still have a hard time getting people telling you that he was an all-pro. So
You're right.
I'm going to go there. And
That's fair.
it's a twisted piece of logic, but that's where I'm going to go.
That is totally fair. I would say similar to how I imagine people actually working in the NFL across other teams know the ability of Andrew Thomas. I feel like in that sense, they would agree with you on Zack Ball. But you're right that the media, a lot of fans, definitely do not give Zack Ball the respect that he deserves. For me, I mean, again,
Where do you want to go?
It's the reigning Super Bowl champions. Like it's
hard, right?
It's hard to say that any of these guys are
It
underrated.
is.
So I'm gonna go with someone who has not played a single snap for them yet, but who I'm just because I'm not really sure what other direction to go on. Like I think Jalen Carter could easily become one of the top defensive tackles. He's not quite there yet, but he could become that this year. I don't want to go with him though.
You can't pick a rookie. You're not going to pick a rookie, are you?
I wanted to take a rookie.
guy's-
Is that kind of cheating?
Well, I think it is, because if he's not in the NFL yet, how could he be appreciated or underappreciated?
It seems like
All right, if you want to go ahead, I'll let you cheat. Go ahead, take the rookie.
I'm
Go
gonna
ahead.
cheat.
Who do you want
I'm
to
gonna
take?
cheat. I'm gonna go with the Eagles' first-round pick, Jihad Campbell, because it seems like he's not being considered is the favorite to be their starting middle linebacker going into the season. And
Well, look at the two guys we just mentioned.
well, I think he might overcome Nakobe Dean. That's why I want to potentially go with him.
Okay.
And this is nothing against Nakobe Dean. I just think Jihad Campbell was extremely talented and skillful this past season playing at Alabama. I think the only reason he dropped all the way down to the Eagles at 31 was because he has some injury concerns. Mm-hmm. There's some, potential red flags. Some teams clearly flagged him as, an injury risk moving down the road, but he was the best linebacker in football last year, if not the best in college football, if not the best, certainly top 3. I think he is just the perfect complement to Zack Ball in Vic Fangio's defense, and it scares me a little bit as a Giants fan and employee thinking about Jihad Campbell coming into the league and developing next to Zack Ball with Vic Fangio as the defensive coordinator. I mean, obviously, the defensive front is what gets all of the attention in Philadelphia. But between those two guys and Nakobe Dean, those are 3 very, very talented linebackers that I feel like could start. Any of the 3 of them could and would start for most teams around the NFL.
And I've looked at their linebacking core, and I'm not talking edge because the edge is a different position now. I've looked at their linebacking core, and I have felt now for several years that's been a weak link for them, in my opinion. They have not been very athletic, making too many tackles after yardage gained, not making too many impact plays. And all of a sudden now, last year, they had 2 guys who really stepped up, and now they had Campbell. All of a sudden, that position isn't so weak anymore.
No, and combine them with the defensive front, that is a very scary front 7 right there.
It is.
And obviously the secondary is there's no slouches back there either.
Well, they've already retooled it.
Yeah,
last
between
year.
the 2 high picks last year, that alone transformed their secondary. Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, who were their first 2 picks last year. We knew when they drafted them last year, we're like, this could be trouble for the rest of the NFC East. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened.
All right, 201-939-4513. We have a phone caller, so why don't we go there before we go to the Commanders? And we will take this phone call here. And you are first, Chris. Welcome to BBKL. Hello.
Hey, Paulie, how's it going? Matt.
Hey, what's going on?
I just wanted to start off and say that you guys, you guys know I've been listening for a long time, and I just took it for granted because of the info, the calls, like all the material that we get. Well, my old lady's a Bills fan, and she wanted some draft info. And so I looked up on the Bills app, and it is like a 2 out of 10 compared to where you guys are like a 9.5 out of 10. And I don't even know what suggestions make up the 0.5. That's how bad they were and how good you guys were.
Well, you're very kind.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Yeah. And then, so now that that's said, Paulie, John, I'm kind of disappointed a little bit in you guys with your guys' like, it's not pessimism.
Well, we got Matt here with us today, okay?
Right. That's
Okay,
why I
go
didn't
ahead.
mention him. Well, I didn't get the thing for like Schmelke, Paulie, Dots, Mr. Citak, Lance, Pearson.
There you go, the whole crew. Yeah, okay.
The whole group.
All right. So you want to hit us now with something negative. Go ahead.
Yes, I didn't mention Citak in this because he seems to have the optimism and actually feel it. And I know you have it, Paulie. That's why I'm kind of disappointed in you and Schmelke.
Okay.
Like, I think that you guys believe it and you feel it, but it's just a little bit worried because of the last couple of seasons, which leads me into my third point. So, early in Shane and Dable, yes. So, early on in Shane and Dable's tenure, we didn't have great depth. So, the Thomas injury and all the rest that derailed that season. And then the next season, he brings in Illuminor, he brings in Runyon, had a great offseason and draft. And then he gets Burns. And then had the excellent draft again. So what was that? The last 2 drafts were really good. The first one there, was that the Thomas and was that the Kayvon draft? 3 years ago.
Kayvon was drafted with Evan Neal.
Kayvon and Evan Neal was Joe Shane and Brian Dable's first draft in 2022.
They had 2 first-rounders that year.
I know, and that seems to be like the worst draft that they've had so far. But anyways, we've had two really good off seasons, and then he brings in Adebo, he brings in Holland. Where the heck was I? Give me 1 sec.
Well, I just want to make sure we back up to point number 2 for a second. You're accusing all of us except for Matt of being like Debbie Downers, like
not that much, Paulie.
Here's what I would tell you.
Optimistic
Okay.
as you feel inside.
Here's what I would tell you. I've been around the game such a long time that I know you can't start eating the ice cream, okay, until you actually see the stuff coming out of the freezer. And it's not coming out of the freezer yet. Heck, they're not even in pads. So, I can't start jumping for joy and ordering, 3 whole double cheese pizzas because they haven't even hit yet. I'm sorry. I can't be too glowing about this. What I see on paper is good. It's really good. I think the improvement is going to be there. But the point that I think John and I have often tried to make is that this team could be much better. And the 1-loss record may not necessarily reflect it as much as the team improves. That's the thing to be wary about. It really is.
I'm just saying, I've been listening
Be
to
careful.
you guys for years and years. So I know, like, your personalities and your day-to-day, sometimes you guys are, have a bad day or whatever. You can tell the difference. I just feel like you're not as optimistic as you feel inside. That's all I'm saying, Paul.
Okay, fine.
All right, here, this one, though, and then...
I want to be optimistic.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you reasons why. We will win that game. Great year last year. Okay, so if last year Malik Neighbors doesn't drop that pass in the second game in the fourth quarter with, a minute 50 left, I believe we win that game in Washington. The Cowboys have a rookie head coach, offensive coordinator, and defensive coordinator. And plus they've got, 3 or 4 either rookies or second-year offensive linemen that got to attend with the Giants' defensive line for a year or two. Against Golson, Dax, KT, Burns, Alexander, and now Carter. So, we got depth. We got depth at the defensive line, and they're going to be a problem. He's going to find the right mix with that. With those guys. I think that we're going to be top 3 in sacks, which will lead to top 3 in turnover ratio. We've got Brian Dable's been a